This podcast is brought to you by Contessa Digital.
Years ago, I was in a situationship. I was dating this guy, and on paper, everything about him was great, right? He was definitely the type of guy that my parents would have been happy to see me with. They would have been proud of that relationship. He met some of my friends. They liked him. We got along well, but there was always something about that relationship that wasn't quite right. And he and I both knew it. He and I both knew that it was not going to last between the two of us because despite how compatible we were, there was always just this tension that something was off. You know, looking back on it later, I realized that one, he was not ready for commitment at the time, and I definitely wanted that. Also, we had a lot of shared values, but there were certain values, like how many kids we wanted to have, that were way apart from each other. And in a real life committed relationship, not just the situationship we had where, you know, we went on fun trips together and went to events and he bought me gifts and stuff like that. Not that fantasy world where it was always happy and light. Whenever things got serious, we realized that this was not a forever relationship. And despite having that realization very early on in us being together, I want to say maybe a few weeks into us being together, I allowed, he allowed, we allowed that situationship to drag on for well over a year. Hey love, welcome to Confidently Cherished. My name is Keshia Rice, and I am a dating coach and hypnotherapist. I help ambitious women learn how to heal the generational patterns that keep them stuck in unhealthy relationships and find relationships in which they feel cherished. And I'm telling you this story about this guy because I was scrolling on social media, as I often do, and I came across this quote that said, "You already know what you need to do. Now it's time to give yourself permission." So I am seriously going to keep this episode short. I know I always say that. But seriously, we are going to be short today because I really want you to take some time and journal about this. What is it that you need to give yourself permission to do? Because for me, this situationship that I had with this guy was not the only time that I found myself in similar circumstances. In fact, pretty much all of my relationships before I met my husband were messed up in a similar way. And what I mean by that is I was not dating and in relationships really for what I wanted to get out of the relationship. I dated guys that I thought would make my parents happy, right? I dated men that, again, looked good on paper. I dated men that my friends would be impressed by. But I did not spend a lot of time doing the work on really figuring out what I wanted out of life and out of love, until I had a quarter life crisis. And even after that, because that quarter life crisis coincided with being in the situationship, even after that, it took me some time to let that go because I was afraid. I was afraid of going out there and finding someone that I really liked, but that my family wouldn't. I could not let go this idea of being in a relationship to please other people. Some of the other things that I had to let go were constantly trying to do everything in my own strength. And I mean this in a couple of ways. One, it is no secret if you listen to this podcast that I am Christian. But just in general, I work with women of faith. So I have clients who are spiritual, who are Christian, who are Muslim, who are Jewish, who are Hindu. And no matter what the faith background is or the spirituality background is, there is something in learning to surrender. Learning to, if you say you have faith, learning to actually trust in something that is higher than yourself. And I was not doing that. I was putting everything else in God's hands. But when it came to dating and relationships, that was something I was definitely trying to force relationships to happen out of my own will. So learning to surrender in that aspect, but also, it's funny because I have always been taken care of my entire life. There are people who would say that my parents spoiled me. In my opinion, I was not spoiled. I was well loved, right? But I was well loved growing up by my parents, and I am still well loved by my parents. I was in relationships where I was also well loved and giving a lot of things. And despite that, I still had a lot of mindset issues around that. I still had a lot of issues with receiving and not feeling like I was worthy of the gifts that I was being given, not feeling like I was worthy of being taken care of. And, I found that was a common denominator in a lot of relationships that I had in the past, where the men I was dating were frustrated because they would give me money or gifts or whatever. And, I was always seen as either not showing appreciation or, arguing with them like, oh no, this is too nice. I don't deserve this. I will save it for another episode because, again, I want you to have some journaling time after you listen to this. But, there's a story of an ex-boyfriend of mine who was highly pissed because he bought me a very expensive bag. And my response to receiving this bag was selling it and using it to pay some of my bills because I didn't feel worthy at the time of carrying around this designer handbag, right? So that was something that I had to give myself permission. I had to give myself permission to let go of constantly having to justify receiving things or feeling like I was not worthy of receiving things, and allowing myself to surrender to being in a relationship with someone who wanted to take care of me. I also had to give myself permission to admit that I wanted to be in a happy and healthy relationship. I come from a family that is it's hard to explain because on one hand, my family is very affectionate, right? So we are definitely huggers. The pandemic was hard for all of us because we're so used to being physically affectionate with everyone. We definitely don't have a problem with saying I love you, but at the same time, my family is not a very emotional family, right? We do things, we get stuff done, and we move on. So the idea of talking about relationships and saying, oh, I want to be married to someone, I want to be in love, and have someone who loves me, that wasn't really something that I heard growing up. I was surrounded by people who are married. My parents have been married for almost 40 years at this point. But at the same time, whenever I heard talk of marriage, it was always on a very practical sense, right? About like building together, tax benefits, that type of thing. And it's not to say that my parents didn't love each other, because I knew they did. I can clearly see it even now, how much my parents love each other. It's just that we didn't really talk about things like that. So giving myself permission to say those things out loud was really huge for me. I also had to give myself permission to cut off relationships that weren't aligned. And this is something that I am still doing. Especially if you've listened to the past few episodes, you know this, that I've been in a process, again, of pruning some of my friendships, because we have to do this from time to time. Seasons come, things change. Friendships that worked in one season no longer work in a new season. And I was in a situation during my situationship where a lot of the friends that I had were either getting married, having kids, and all of that. So part of me didn't feel as comfortable spending time with them because they were moving on to this new season in life. The other half of my friends were the forever singles, right? The ones who were very big on, oh, I don't need a man, I'm just going to date and have fun and party. The ones who constantly trashed men. And I had to realize that spending so much time with them was fueling my negative thoughts about dating and relationships. And if I wanted to be in a relationship that was happy and healthy, I couldn't spend so much time around people who were so toxic in that regard. And finally, I had to give myself permission to just be me. I was bullied as a kid. And when you go through experiences like that, that combined with the fact that I am a recovering people pleaser, like, you get used to the idea of pretending to be something that you're not, to be accepted, to be liked, to be loved by others. And especially in my case, because even before I became a dating coach, I was very interested in psychology. So I definitely learned like all these mindset hacks and tactics to make someone more attracted to you and everything. And I'm not saying there's something completely wrong with those. At the same time, I was doing a lot of things that weren't 100% me in order to be liked by men. And those things worked. I was always in relationships. I was a serial monogamist. I went from one relationship, that one ended, went straight into another. But at the same time, I never felt aligned with a lot of the men that I dated because there was no way I could. Those men were not dating the real me. They were dating a version of me that I had crafted, right? So that version of me was aligned with them, but not who I truly was. And before I met my husband, that was something that I spent a fair amount of time on, really diving into who the heck is Keshia, right? Like, who am I really? What do I really want? And how can I show up as my real self in a relationship? How can I make sure that the next time a man falls in love with me, he actually falls in love with me, and that he's not disappointed when he meets the real me, because I was presenting something else the whole time, right? So I really had to learn how to give myself permission to be myself. And that is where I want to leave you. What do you have to give yourself permission to do? The things that you want in life, the relationship you want, the money you want, the type of career you want, the health you want, what are the things that you need to give yourself permission in order to have that life? So please take some time, journal that out. And also, if you found this episode helpful, as always, I am on social media at Keshia Rice, Keshiarice, and that is my handle on Instagram, on TikTok, and on YouTube. So message me and let me know what you think of this episode. And I can't wait to hear about your breakthroughs in your journaling. Love you so much. Bye. Hey there. So you made it all the way to the end of the episode, which means I have two things to say. One, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And two, you like me. You really like me. So I would appreciate it if you would show that like by subscribing to this podcast so that more people can hear about it and enjoy it as much as you do. And if you want to know more about any of the links that I mentioned on this episode or any guests that I've had, be sure to go to KeshiaRice.com/links. That's KeshiaRice.com/links. I can't wait to talk to you again in the next episode. So see you then.